I've been doing this for 5 years now, and I've given over the hour to a lot of other guys, and they tell their life stories, and I've never really told mine, so let me see if I can get this one to start. I got a call last fall from Monica Hampton of the Furniture Society telling me I would get their award of distinction for work I did 50 years ago, and I frankly didn't know what the hell she was talking about, and I had to figure it out. And we did a thing in January at the Wood Art Museum in Philadelphia with Mark Spheri, which also caused me to need to, he asked me a lot of questions, and I really didn't know the answer. I couldn't figure out, I didn't know how my own story lined up all in a row. What did you do in the 20th century, Daddy? And I just want to note that I'm up to 28,800 odd sunrises and still counting for the Furniture Society conference in June, where the theme is You Are Here. Makers, place, and impact. So I'm considering time and place to being two dimensions of the same question. The award of distinction lands on me for journeyman work I did fully 50 years ago, because in '76, age 30, I became the first editor-in-chief of the then new black and white fine woodworking magazine, which I did for almost 10 years. And it was a pre-internet cultural moment that spawned woodworkers, and when woodworkers kind of peeked out of their shops and looked around. And I took my mission as enlarging their viewpoints, maybe cross-pollinating, and maybe in that way I contributed to an upwelling of interest in woodworking and furniture making. Well, that's only one slice of my life. Before that I had an apprenticeship as a journalist and woodworker, and then afterwards I had a business selling books and another business publishing books. And now I'm retired, and I'm mostly doing wood turning and making videos. I was born in northern Alberta. My family lives on both sides of the border, and I have too. I was taken to Vancouver as a small child, and then as a young adult I moved all over North America, and I landed up in southwestern Connecticut in 1976 and stayed there for 32 years, except for a year in England. And ever since, I've been in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I retired here, age 66. And by the time of the Furniture Society conference in June, I'll be 79. I'll outlive my dad. When I was a kid, everybody made stuff. My grandfather saw a shopsmith in the department store, and he made his own lathe drill press table saw combo out of wood. I remember it had a brass tailstock ram, and it was just a beautiful unit that he made. The stuff he turned with it was kind of clunky, as you can see in the photo, but hey, my mother was a potter and a painter and a teacher. I learned craft practices from my mother. She taught us how to go to the woods and dig clay out of a stream and process it into stuff we could make. And my dad was a printer and a writer and a chess player. He left me this totemic block of Fraser River jade. He was going to carve into it someday, and I'm going to carve into it someday too. When I was a kid, everybody made stuff. It wasn't unusual. I went to technical high school in Vancouver, in Burnaby. I majored in physics and tube-era electronics and woodshop. And Vancouver was a great place to be 21 years old in 1967, the summer of love. And in the next year, at age 22, I went east. When I was a student on campus, Bill Reed was working on campus carving the totemic house poles you can still see today at the Museum of Anthropology. And this enormous sculpture of Raven and the First Men came along later. It's a centerpiece of the museum. My point is that the iconography of the First Nations of the Pacific Northwest is kind of baked into me, and it's always stayed with me. So my apprenticeship in writing and editing began at university. I became editor of the campus 3 times a week newspaper in my senior year at age 20. I'd worked on it every year. We tried to be like a downtown newspaper, but I didn't really learn how words to work until I went to work in the newspaper business for the next 10 years, and I worked all over the place. Everywhere I went, I worked for newspapers. I got married in Toronto in 1969, and we began our family there. My daughter was born in Toronto, and our other 2 children were born later on in Connecticut, in Cleveland. And by the time we were into the early 70s, with the civil rights struggle and burned out cities and assassinations and the Vietnam War and Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, Watergate, and I'd work at the Cleveland Plain Dealer computer typesetting and smaller newsrooms. It was a lousy life. I didn't like it. It was time to me to move on and try and find a simpler, more authentic path. I'd been making furniture in the basement, so I thought, hey, maybe I could become a woodworker. At the time, the information landscape was kind of thin. This is pre-internet and pre-YouTube. We had books like Cabinet Making and Millwork by John Fire. I'll never forget the thrill I found one day in '72 when I stumbled into the Encyclopedia of Furniture Making in a little bookshop in Cleveland Heights. And every once in a while, you'd find a book like Tommy Simpson's Fantasy Furniture, which is mostly made of paper mache, paste, and paint. But Tommy's a brilliant guy, and he also got the Award of Distinction in 2006. And there were only maybe a couple of colleges where you could study woodworking and furniture design. Summer of '74, somebody showed me this poster of Stephen Hogman's work. I was absolutely blown away. I went to Toronto to find this guy, and we became lifelong friends there. And I would say that Stephen Hogman was a major influence on my life. That fall, partly inspired by Hogman, partly by work of Wendell Castles that I'd seen, and partly by, I got to do something, I enrolled as a retread freshman in woodworking and furniture design at the School for American Craftsmen in Rochester. And as it happens, 39 years later, in 2013, Hogman's book on projects, mixed with portfolio photos, it was my last major Wood World book project. I guess I just want to say that Hogman's deep and wide-ranging mind was kind of like nuclear fusion. He was always 30 years ahead of everybody else. And I deeply mourn his passing in 2023. One of the things my big question at school was how to design, and one of the things I learned from Stephen was the key to designing, at least for me, is drawing and photography and making models. You draw and keep drawing to figure out what you're going to make, and then you draw and photograph how you make it, and then you draw and photograph how it worked out, and then you think and repeat. And I've retained that at the core of my own shop practice to this day. Those are Stephen's drawings on the left and my own on the right. Some of them are pretty tightly measured, and others of them are extremely loose and clumsy, but it doesn't matter. It helps me think. My woodworking apprenticeship consisted of 2 years at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I made chairs, I made cabinets, I made tables, and I got into wood turning. My teachers were Bill Kaiser, Ian Kirby, Doug Sigler, Craig McCart, and John Brooks, and of course the other students. And I planned to return to Vancouver and open a workshop. But I'm a journalist. I'd kept a binder full of notes and photos showing all the amazing things I'd seen and learned at school. And it was truly a mind-blowing, life-changing experience to find myself in a yeasty place like RIT, and with the visitors who came to the shop and showed slides, and the other students, and the untrammeled opportunity to make stuff, truly life-changing. And while I was still at school, I made a very important connection in my life with Paul Roman, who visited looking for material for a magazine he was going to start. He was calling it Cabinet Maker's Journal. He soon renamed it Fine Woodworking. So I hauled out my binder full of notes and slides and sold him stories really for every issue. This is my split-turning camel, which was featured in issue number 2. It was made as a class project to build a rocking animal. I made it as a 2-seater out of walnut logs I'd found on a farm out near Scottsville. I wrote something in every issue from then on. The camel, like I say, was in number 2. So that was kind of me putting a marker down about wood turning, and also getting my foot into fine woodworking very early on. So in 1976, while I was still at school, I made an enormous lathe out of salvaged parts that come from a barn. It had oak ways, and I built it up with maple blocks so I could swing 39 inches between centers, a whole table if I wanted to. And if I'd gone into the furniture business, I would have gone this direction. I would have made lathe-turned furniture. But I didn't go in the furniture business. But nevertheless, there's a piece I made in '76, and the piece on the lathe with me turning is not that piece, but it's an adjacent piece from that series. I was at the time clamping 4 blocks together and then turning them on 2 or 3 axes, rotating each block. It wasn't I guess it is multi-axis. I don't really know quite what you call this kind of work, but anyway, I did a lot of it at the time, and I saw an enormous inside-out turning, and I saw a lot of potential in it. So by the end of '76, Roman had persuaded me to move to Connecticut, and I became editor of Fine Woodworking in my journeyman years. Fine Woodworking was written and edited by woodworkers for woodworkers, and we hit big in a cultural moment when a lot of people shared my yearning for a simpler, more authentic life. There was a huge thirst to learn, and our mission was to deliver solid, pertinent information and to open up windows and show woodworkers what others were doing. Now, this was all pre-internet. We listed events, we ran classified ads, and we actually answered the reader mail. We tried to foster community, and we had the domain to ourselves. Issue 5 cover is shown here. Wendell Castle allowed me to document his stack lamination process, which I saw as a signal to the emerging community of furniture artists that we were going to go there with you. We were not going to stick with table saw and router. We were going to do all kinds of stuff. If it had to do with wood and furniture and turning, we were going to cover it. Kind of a declaration, I guess. So we had to map the domain. We had to understand what was going on. Where did we fit in this whole thing? I used spreadsheet grids and diagrammatic maps and file cards and Post-its and assembled a magazine written by professionals for an audience of amateurs and beginners. And the workshop was the pivot. Whatever you were doing, you had to have a shop and a place to, and wood and tools. And so I understood at the time that had to be the core of the venture, that was the only thing all these people had in common was a workshop or the need for one, and the equipment, and of course wood. And everybody has an agenda. I assumed that the fine woodworking readers were just like me. They all needed to know joinery and hand tools and machines. And we delivered full technical sequences for furniture elements, boxes, chairs, and tables. But I also made sure we explored foundational skills like frame and panel, mortise and tenon, and old ways. And we dipped into adjacent fields like lutherie and timber frame carpentry, and new techniques like stack lamination and router inlay and laminate bending. I got Jerry Osgood to write a series on how to do laminate bending, like this table of Jerry's that's shown here. Everybody had an axe, and we kind of made room for them all. And I felt throughout those years that we were living in a bubble. We had an opportunity here to do this. The window might slam down at any time, so we had to cram it all in. We kind of tried to pack the magazine tight with 75 dense pages 6 times a year for 10 years. And I notice in later years now, they don't do that at all. They let the articles puff out to 10 pages, and so there's only 3 or 4 of them in an issue. And that, I guess, makes it a whole lot more attractive as a business proposition, but it also makes it a whole lot less dense and varied. And we had contributing editors. Roman had signed them up, and it was my job to nurture them and feed them. Andy Marlowe lived in Pennsylvania and York. Great guy. We became good friends. He gave us close. He had touched the hand who touched the hand at the beginning of time, and he was an American traditional furniture maker, so we needed that. Tay Frid gave us a connection to the furniture programs. He'd founded the program at RIT and also at Rhode Island School. Tay was a Dane. He'd come from contemporary Denmark. He had a very, very good education. He connected us to the European tradition. And we had Bruce Hoadley, professor of wood technology at University of Massachusetts. He showed us why wood didn't behave the way we thought about water and wood and wood technology, and wrote this fantastic book, Understanding Wood, which I edited, that is still in print. I think is still the best book we have about understanding why and how wood behaves as it does. So all the stuff that's shown here is still in print. One of Frid's maxims was design around the construction. You learn how to make stuff, and then you design new stuff using the materials of techniques that you'd already practiced and know. Frid made these 3-legged stools in different heights, and he used this 3-view drawing that combined side view, top view, and in front elevation in one drawing as his example of what he meant by design around the construction and how to display it. And he used these tools as a signature piece to exhibit because Fred was an enormously practical guy. He could pack them in a box and ship them. They shipped easily. They were light. He could just show them anywhere, and that's what he did. My teachers at RIT were from the same lineage, they design around the construction. But we pretty soon met woodworkers from different traditions who followed a different star, design around the material in particular. Krenov and Nakashima, for example. You study the piece of wood and you ask, what would you like me to make of you? And then most pernicious to the traditionalists were people who said design around the idea and figure it out as you go. And we saw that in Wendell Castle and Gary Bennett and Stephen Hockman's work. And looking back from this distance, yeah, all of it. Let's not be one channel. Let's be yes to all of it. And fine woodworking pretty quickly became famous for its illustrations, drawings and photographs knit together to try and make a technical point. And at the time, Rick Mastelli began experimenting with video as well, and we even published book video sets. And this was all before we had computers, so the illustrations were done by pen on paper, if you can imagine. And we did stories about all the great ones. We traveled everywhere to produce stories. Wendell Castle and Tay Frid and George Nakashima and Art Carpenter and lots of others who weren't yet famous. And if you wanted to write for us, we'd probably send an editor to meet with you to help you take great photos and to scope out what else you had tucked away in your workshop and your slide portfolio. It was really fun. It was delicious to meet these guys. And we had our amazing readers. In 76, we invited them to send in photos of their best work so we could publish them in a book that we thought we'd repeat every 2 years. And we did repeat it 8 times, but it took more than 20 years to do that. The response was overwhelming and utterly mind-blowing. And so were sales volume figures for that first black and white book, which is shown here. The range of work and the quality of work, we had hoped, but who knew? It was absolutely terrific, and it affirmed what we were doing. It affirmed that there were people out there doing amazing work in every part of the domain. You guys still with me? I'm not seeing any of you because I'm looking at the slideshow, so I don't see the gallery.
Great, yes, we're still here.
We're here. Oh,
okay. You all right with this?
Terrific.
Okay, we're going to keep going. They went on to 8 more or 7 more design books. I think the series ended in '92. And in full color, but that first one was, boy, blew my head wide open. The cultural upheaval of the 70s and 80s threw up a lot of new opportunities to show and see contemporary work, and also to sell it. The Renwick Smithsonian Gallery opened in '72 with a show called Woodworks. Freetown and Eames Gallery opened. There were furniture galleries in Manhattan and New York and Philadelphia and California and Boston. For me, all of these were new places to see work and meet makers and new ways of finding new stories. And we began already, though, to experience the struggle of making space for this stuff, to show this stuff in between more basic articles on furniture making. And, I had to recognize that your typical fine woodworking reader was not going to make a table like the one up in the upper right there, or a chair like that stuff. Those were winners in the Young American show, but your home, it wasn't stuff your basement woodworker was going to make. Or maybe they were. We didn't know yet. We, a lot of front office pressure to kind of keep the magazine on target for the basement amateur woodworker, and at the same time keep track of what's going on in the larger field. So it was a constant tension between those two forces. We sent the staff on the road all the time. There were weekend woodworking marketplaces under a variety of sponsors. We went to those. We went to exhibitions of local work. We visited workshops all over the country. We're still pre-internet, and there's no YouTube. For most woodworkers, these kind of weekend events were pretty the only way you could meet people and see new tools and techniques and get new ideas. So this stuff was really very important in the development of the woodworking field as we know it now. And we had the rise of architecture, paint, glass, metal, plastic, color, decoration, negative space, narrative content. Was this art? Was this craft? Who knew? Luxury gewgaws, or was it furniture? Was it luxury gewgaws for the rich, or was it furniture for the masses? There was a lot going on. We struggled to understand it with essays and photo features in every issue. Daring contemporary designs were at the edge of our domain, and while there wasn't anywhere else to see this work, garage woodworkers probably couldn't build it. This is a back cover we ran in 1980. This is Gary Bennett's famous nail cabinet, Paducah cabinet with a bent nail driven into a small central door, and Wendy Maruyama's maple writing desk with purple tenons and a purple scribble on it. I still meet people who tell me that that's the moment that damn magazine went off the rails. However, in last winter, I actually encountered Wendy Bennett. Bennett died a few years ago, but I met Wendy at a gallery open in New York, and we had run a lot of letters to the editor critical of this work, and she had just been a student at the time. I asked her how she felt about all those letters. She said, "That's how I knew I was on the right track." So there you go. So Glenn Adamson wrote that we at Fine Woodworking had created the source code for the studio furniture movement. Now, I think what we actually wove was not dead code, but living DNA with strands that included the best of post-war popular mechanics, American period furniture, green woodworking, the arts and crafts movement, Scandinavian modern, traditional Japan, European efficiency, and contemporary studio craft art. It was our common heritage, and we did our best to knot it all together 6 times a year. Okay, end of an era. Fine Woodworking was built on the founders, Paul Roman's conviction that only makers could explain making. So we hired woodworkers and taught them how to be editors and photographers, and we only accepted authors who were themselves makers. This photograph is of a team of makers. We'll see this one again that we had assembled by 1985. And all of a sudden around then, our brand was beset by competition. It forced a change from printing in black and white to full color and needed new skills and a new perspective. And I'd spent 10 years there in the saddle, working really long hours and traveling a lot. And we suffered the transition from typewriters to computers. And we'd made a pretty good magazine, I thought, but I was fried. And they needed me to move on to make room for a new team. And I needed to move on. I had 3 kids. And I needed to do something at a slower pace of magazine development and book publishing. So that's what I did. So before moving on, I took it all apart to build a series of topical books. The 21-volume Fine Woodworking On series. It was sausage making, you know. We used up everything technical, but we left aside the personality profiles and the exhibition layouts and critical commentaries. We thought that we'd get them into their own book, but that never happened. The series was a big hit, and a referendum on what readers wanted most or bought most easily, and the winner by far, which I would not have been able to predict, but looking back it was obvious, was Proven Shop Tips, because it was bite-sized morsels that Jim Ritchie edited and drew. You could read it sitting on the can, you know. It was like everybody would look at it, oh, I could figure that out. But it was great. It was all little light bulbs going off, 144 pages of it. And looking back, though, the unintended consequence of doing this 21-volume series of reprint books was an absolutely endless series of reprint volumes from every woodworking publisher. Because we had evergreen information. We could buy it once and get it in print, and then we could sell it over and over and over again. And other publishers in the domain figured that out as well. And I've confessed that in my later years at Fox Chapel, I probably put out 100 books like this from different archives, from American Woodworker and I don't know, a whole bunch of different magazines. Really a plague on the landscape. So, editorial styles. This slideshow, for the first time maybe since 1984, I reviewed all 54 issues of Fine Woodworking that were done under my leadership. I called it the Golden Black and White Years. I turned all 4,000 pages. I reread the letters and select features and skimmed the photos and drawings and the growing volume of ads. And I remembered the sawdust-covered characters that my colleagues and I met, and also the ongoing editorial contradiction. Because early on, we'd taken Scientific American as our editorial model. We understood that shop and tools were what the readers had in common, and we bet that if you got a real boot out of one or two stories, you'd come back for more. And while we did publish a few demonstration projects, we preferred to articles about tools and techniques that were pertinent to many projects, design around the construction, and teach the men to fish. But when growth slowed in 82, 83, and a new team of marketing professionals armed with data came along, they advocated for more beginner projects that readers could build with table saw and router and sander, which meant less of everything else. My editorial philosophy had succeeded in the years when we had the domain to ourselves, and we were surfing the crest of a cultural wave. But in the 80s, beset by new competitors, the wave broke, and the editorial mission had to change. Furniture making is not some outlying thing. It's in some ways at the center of the national conversation. You know, in '78, Robert Whitley visited the White House to measure the Resolute desk so he could duplicate it for the JFK library. And I noticed that I heard that after Elon Musk's kid wiped snot on the Resolute desks, Trump sent it out to be refinished. In '79, Gary Bennett told me how he had felt collected and displayed by Carter's Vice President Mondale and his wife at glittery receptions for when his furniture joined the Smithsonian. And when Carter left Washington in '81, his staff gave him a shop full of woodworking machines. We comped him his fine woodworking subscription, and we sent an editor to get the story about his porch swing. In '82, I bought a redwood bench from Bennett. It came with a nicely mounted Polaroid of me with the artist, casually snapped by his partner Sylvia. It felt very special. And later on, I saw a tall stack of identical frames just waiting for their Polaroid pictures. It was a really telling glimpse of professional art business practice, how to stroke up the client and make him feel good.
And then at the start of the Reagan administration, Ronnie himself accepted a lovely rocker made by Sam Maloof, and it became the first contemporary piece to join the official White House collection.
And in '92, the Windsor chairmaker Michael Dunbar met Trump and urged him to run for president. And ironically, I'm sitting in a Dunbar chair right now as I write these notes. Well, Trump, who is exactly 2 days older than me, seems to favor things that are a lot more carved and gilded. So, second acts. With fine woodworking in new hands, I worked to capitalize upon the magazine's original good fortune. I collaborated with Betsy Levine and a powerful team of women to develop Threads magazine, which is still being published. And then I expanded my horizons for 4 years, '88, '92, as publisher of books and videos. And here's some of the things we published in those years. And I learned a lot about the global publishing business and some fundamental truths about publishing, about time and place. Daily newspapers, which serve small localities like cities and states, you can plan them and build them in a week and write them and deliver them in days and hours. Bi-monthly magazines, which serve national audiences, form kind of a square grid in time and space. At any moment, you're working on 6 issues. You know, the one that's going to the printer and the ones that the readers just have and the articles you're developing. You're constantly moving this 6-issue block through time and space. And then I learned that illustrated nonfiction books are planned years ahead and marketed worldwide. But once the author is finished writing and illustrating and hand the manuscript over to us, it's pretty much always exactly 9 months between receiving the manuscript, getting it edited, and in print. So in 1995, I became an independent bookseller. I peddled authentic information for woodworkers and furniture makers. We had offices in a small warehouse in Bethel, Connecticut, and we published a 64-page book catalog twice a year with 1,500 pertinent titles listed that we sourced worldwide. We had a traveling bookstore that we set up at 10 wood furniture shows every year, including many AAW and Furniture Society annual conferences. In the upper right is an early setup on tables with marker written signs, and then later is the one below is our much later setup where we had a whole lot of furniture we took and lighting and signage and everything that worked right. It was a great business until 2001 when 9/11 killed off direct mail marketing. By 2005, Amazon's lower prices and glowing clout had nibbled us to death. I remember very well the reader who said, "Well, we love your catalog. We learned about all these great books, and we got a great price on Amazon." Well, thank you very much. Book selling had also revealed empty places in the marketplace, in the domain. Let's start our own little publishing company. And we had a pretty good list with it. Lasted. We had books by Stephen Hogman, James Krenov, Ian Kirby, Ken Horner. I'm especially proud of Bob Lang's fine series of shop drawings for craftsman furniture and woodwork. But, you know, we had three companies then. We had Cambium Books, Cambium Press. We still had our my editorial business, which my son was working with me doing on the website. It got very complicated. Coming up 2006, coming up on age 60, I'm overextended, I'm exhausted, and I'm divorced. So I sold Cambium Press and folded it into Fox Chapel Publishing in Lancaster, PA, where I went to work as editorial director for a few last years. One of the high points of my little publishing career, though, was David Pye. Davis Pye taught us how to think about design and workmanship, how form does not follow function, and how to understand the difference between workmanship of risk and workmanship of certainty, and the importance of leaving workmanlike traces so new detail comes into view at every distance. Hogman had introduced me to Pye's books in '74, and a few years later, traveling for fine woodworking, I visited Pye, who died in '93. And in '95, I met David Herbert of the Herbert Press. We got together and published a joint transatlantic new edition of both books. Today, the meaty Mortise and Tenon magazine still debates Pye's ideas, and Christopher Schwartz at Lost Arts Press continues to pursue old ways of working wood and of thinking about it. Conceptually, these are our direct descendants. I kept my own hand in making furniture for my own home and the homes of my children and for our business offices. I was strongly influenced by Krenov. I like to show off the wood figure and to combine unusual elements. And I'm glad I never did go into the woodworking or furniture business. I might have lost my love of making, just as I did lose my love of writing. From '98 to 2001, working closely with Rick Mistelli and Deborah Fillion and the furniture scholars Ned Cook and Glenn Adamson, we tried to define studio furniture through a groundbreaking pair of books, the first two Furniture Studio books. And then over the next 5 years, the Furniture Studio and its many generous donors sponsored 3 more new books in the series in collaboration with their committee members and the designer Maura Zimmer. I don't quite remember why the series foundered. I think we were not hitting the mark, and I think the funding dried up for it as well. Anyway, and I wrote a few books on my own. I did the Woodworking Today, Dramatic Evolution was the AAW's 25th anniversary book. It was a 3-year project for me. I wrote a book on birdhouses, which I was sold through Sterling. It made a lot of money. I never made any money on it. I just got paid, well. And I did a book on woodworking for kids. We meant this originally for the Boy Scouts and for those little, what do they call them, soapbox racer, Pinewood Derby. It did very well, also did very well. And on a more personal note, I remarried at home in 2010 to my darling wife, Tina. At the time, I was 64 and she was 58, second time around for us both. That's our wedding picture right there. So when I was a little kid, my dad had a weekly newspaper. He set all the type by hand, letter by letter. Then he got a linotype machine. They tore open the shop wall to get it in, and with that he could compose and cast complete lines in hot metal. Linotypes were still in general use when I was at university, but fine woodworking was entirely photoset, and publications like Furniture Matters and Wood Turning Fundamentals are entirely digital. You can print them out, but they don't exist in the solid world from a business perspective. Digital typesetting and printing meant that anybody with a laptop could handle the whole process, and some people thought that meant you could do without editors and other gatekeepers. But as we now see in unmoderated social media, not so much. On the woodworking side, it went from homemade shopsmiths to radial arm saws, table saw, to compound miter chop saw, and the saw stop, and track saws, and now CNC routers and 3D printers. So I turned 50 in '96, with the internet rising, and by 2000, everybody had a computer, and CNC technology was filtering down to small shops. And when I turned 60 in 2006, and by now anybody with a laptop can publish books and videos and podcasts, and if you want to print them, you can print them on demand. Publishing and woodworking had completely changed. I'm a dinosaur. So what do? I go boating. Ocean or lake or river, I've always lived near or on or near the water. I live on the river now. And paddling a small boat, especially one you built yourself, like the canoe sold here, is absolutely exhilarating. One of the best experiences in life. Almost as good as sex. In 2010, when I retired, I didn't want to write anymore. It was time to make things, so I returned to wood turning. I got a small lathe, and I had a lot of fun investigating the expressive potential of basic spindles. I was interested in the shapes the tools made and in the spaces in between these things. In 2013, I joined the ITE, the International Turning Exchange, for an 8-week session in Philadelphia in the summertime. It was an intensive immersion at UArts, and it gave me a glimpse of the working life and the furniture-making fork in the road that I had not taken. And in the middle of that summer, my younger brother Robin, also a woodworker, photographer, and writer, died at age 64. That was summer 2013. That was the summer I made this folding table, which is in my living room. We never folded. It just, anyway, three-legged folding table using a 4-bar linkage kind of mechanism. I did a lot with the 4-bar linkage. Here's a little, I'm going to click this little video so it'll play while I'm talking. I got really interested in this mechanism. I've shown it to you guys before. My tool cabinet. I made a lot of workshop furniture. I think that mechanism has tremendous furniture potential, and all wood up a very sturdy folding shelf, but I'm probably not going to exploit it any further. I also make these things, Platonic polyhedra, using rare earth magnets. Absolutely fascinated by the tensegrity mass that Kenneth Snelson made. I don't know how to make those. I've tried a number of times. But I make these other things. What do you call them anyway? Platonic solids, using rods with magnets embedded in the ends and spherical rare earth magnets. I've made a lot of these, and these things turn up over and over in my work. I also like to make practical tableware. I like to see them give stuff away and see it in people's homes. I do not like to sell work. I don't want to measure out my time, but I do like other people to have my work. And I got heavily into working with the Sphericon, a twisted double cone, a geometric investigation building on the work of David Springett. I go in deep enough to turn inverse and hollow Sphericons. And in 2018, while I was making Sphericons, I was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer, same as Biden has. The prostate gland is kind of shaped like a Sphericon, and these things took on a mystic significance. And when I gave a white ash Sphericon box to a local shaman named Cougar, he handled it with gloves and tongs, and he burned it and buried the ash deep in the woods. Didn't cure. Well, maybe it did. I don't know. I'm still alive. You can take a lot of meds to keep cancer at bay. The ugly plastic bottles stinking of disease always offended me. Sent me on a years-long investigation of turned jars and urns and pocket pillboxes. Early on, I had tried and failed to cut wooden threads, so I turned instead to magnets embedded in the wood. As Chester Gould proclaimed atop the Dick Tracy comic strip, the nation that controls magnetism controls the universe. So in the upper left, you can see Bradford pear trees, 4 of them forming an arch. And that's my house in the arch there in the center of the arch and the way in the distance of the photograph. And on the right are 5 pear wood urns I've made from some of the Bradford pear that came down. They're funerary urns. They all have a patch of bark and cambium layer on the outside. What I like about Bradford pear is it turns beautifully. It doesn't have a really strong figure, but has a lot of subtle color, and it holds detail absolutely beautifully. The authorities consider it highly invasive and problematic, but I find it great to turn. And everybody needs a set of funerary urns, don't they? Over on the upper left, there's a bookcase containing my archive, hundreds of books and thousands of pages and hundreds of thousands of illustrations and millions of words. It amounts to 10 feet of compressed wood paper. And on the right is my deck, 118 turned balusters resembling caryatids out of cypress for the handrails. When I look back on it all, it is one hell of a mountain of stuff. But in the day, you just send the current job off to press, and then you turn to the next job and the next. And it's exactly the same with wood turning multiples, as Richard Raffin once explained to me. Raffin, who's getting the AAW's Lifetime Award this year. You don't set out to turn 100 of anything. You just turn one, and then you turn another. So in COVID isolation, after testing live video setups in my basement shop, Lancaster Woodturners installed a 3-camera live video Zoom setup and committed to the hybrid meeting format. I'm very proud of that. Our club grew in that time in COVID from 40 members to more than 100, which to me proved the concept. And since April 2020, as most of you know, I've been moderating and hosting this weekly Thursday morning Woodturners Coffee Hour on Zoom. And you can see my videos on YouTube. Just search John Kelsey Artisan. And I couldn't let you go without a glimpse of my own basement workshop. It's centered on the lathe, supported by a chop saw, bandsaw, and planer. I got rid of the table saw many years ago, and it took up too much space, and it was mostly table and not much saw. I got a lot of wood and turning billets, and I remember another of Frid's dictums, you have to get ahead on your wood, you got to get ahead on your wood. Which I've done, I think. I've always had a workshop, except for 3 years when I moved 3 times in 3 years. I moved the wood along with the tools, but I didn't really have anywhere to do anything until for that block of time. I've had about 12 workshops in my life, starting from the electronics bench I built in the attic when I was a kid in 1961, through basements and garages, and one time a stairwell, to my current 1,200 square feet of heated basement with 8-foot ceilings, its own electrical panel, and double doors direct to the outside. It's excellent shop space. It's what sold me on the house. In 2014, the workshop was what we moved here first, so we could make stuff for setting up the new house, of course. I make a lot of magnet boxes. It keeps it fun for me. There's a little video of them I'm going to let go. I like to make them with hidden magnets. Radial-oriented hidden magnets, so they open easily with a twist and they close with a click. The wood figure all lines up, and visitors to my shop often ask to buy one, but I won't sell them. I give them away in exchange for a photo. Fine Woodworking turns 50 this year. Roman died in 24, and the family sold it to Active Interest Media, which also publishes the competitor Popular Woodworking. There's no office anymore. The staff all works from home. The magazine's 50 years old. It is still dense with exploded drawings and photo sequences and router and table saw projects and techniques. There's hardly any quirky byways into adjacent woodcrafts. Not hardly any personality interviews, and hardly any delightful surprises. So to my eye, it's all been sanded smooth and highly polished. It's not very interesting. But it's, on the other hand, in an age when new media is rapidly devouring old, it still exists as a bi-monthly magazine, so I got to hand it to them. They've kept it going. My 3 kids are also turning 50, and back in those fine woodworking days when I traveled and worked late a lot, my kids took the heat. They came through it pretty good, though. In this photo, that's Morgan on the left, me in the middle, my son Ted, my daughter Jennifer. If you want to stick around, I'll show you grandchildren photos too. I've got 5 of those. So my mother was a teacher, my son was a teacher, my grandson is a teacher. I never wanted to be a teacher, but writing and editing are a kind of teaching, and magazine management mostly meant hiring, teaching, and mentoring staff. Last week I put this chart together to show how my late 20th century life and career fit into the domain of woodworking and print periodicals, where my mentees went, and how that all fit around studio furniture. I think the key point here is the McLuhan quote. I was a student in '67, and McLuhan was a big deal, and I still consider him a prophet of the new era. He said new media, electric technologies cannibalize the old. And since media are extensions of ourselves, that means that they're in fact cannibalistic, eating people. And to survive, one must study the habits of cannibals. Keep on talking, it comes down to me. I live in Lancaster County by the Conestoga River. With my wife Tina and our handsome cat, Tato, our land slopes down to the river. We've got mature pin oak, white ash, black walnut, English walnut, forest cherry, Bradford pear, sycamore, and mulberry. The ash tree, Yggdrasil, rises up through our deck from the center of the seven realms to stand guard over our little house. We live in a meadow forest community with its own intelligence and intentions, season upon season. And I take great pleasure in studying the trees and how the amazing things that they do over the course of a year. We think trees are passive, just standing there, but what they do in the months of April and May is just absolutely mind-blowing. The amount of material they put out, the amount of pollen and flowers and leaves and new growth and consolidation through the summer and repeat it all again next year. So I'm an early riser. I like to see the sun come up. I learned in middle school that when I had an early morning paper route and my dad worked the overnight shift, we'd both get home about the same time and have breakfast together. My dad is much on my mind because I'm now older than he was at the end. It's a long life, and I've got to be grateful for every morning that Tato and I see the old man peep up over the eastern horizon outside our breakfast window. And I take the Woodward Tarot card as emblematic in that. So the award of distinction. When a cultural moment sweeps by, you can catch the wind and ride it, but you mustn't imagine that you created the moment. Actually, the moment creates you. And it's true that only makers can properly explain the process of making. It's also true that you can't bang out quality books and magazines all by yourself. It takes time and a team. So I'm grateful to be receiving the award of distinction, and in accepting, I'm representing a legion of wood-making soldiers in the trenches of ink, craft artisans and writers like these fine woodworking platoon, this fine platoon of people for the work we did 50 years ago and still ongoing. And thank you very much to the Furniture Society, and thank you very much to you all for indulging me in my slideshow. There we go. And I see I haven't killed you all off.
This sounds like a good base for another book, John.
Who'd want to read it?
Wood shop. Thank God for wood.